Hello, this is Real World Audio, and today we are diving into some of the causes for excessive hiss and noise with vinyl. And this video was inspired by Robert's post, and he posted on my silver uh, video that he heard a very high-end OTL, which means output transformer-less hybrid system, and the speaker cables were silver, and he listened to an LP that he thought was in an immaculate condition, and the sound that he heard was among the best he heard, but the surface and groove noise was a shock, making some of his records almost unlistenable. The best he could figure out that the records may not have been as clean as he thought. And so maybe you are thinking that the reason for hearing so much of the LP noise and hiss was because the silver cables made it apparent. So now I'm going to share what my experience is with vinyl noise and silver cables. So in my experience, silver cables do make a lot of difference between recovering high frequency information or not. So compared to copper, silver does give us a lot more of the high frequency energy that we do not get when we listen to copper. However, I found that this doesn't coincide with making LP noise worse than it was before, or making the hiss worse. I think it's quite the opposite. That going for silver cable, you will hear more of the low level noise and hiss than you heard before. But in my experience, the noise and the hiss becomes much less bothersome, because with silver, the more silver you have in your system, the least the noise and the hiss is going to be part of the music. So in other words, what I experienced is, for going more and more silver, then the noise start to get separated from the music component. So in my system, when I listen to LPs, the surface noise of the LP, it sounds as if there's a fireplace in the background. Depending on the condition of the LP, it might be a very lively fireplace, and that's an indication that the record needs cleaning. Or it may be just worn out so badly, and then I will just say goodbye to it. But that's very rarely the case. Most often, these cracks and pops and hissing noises, they are very benign, and the thing is that they are completely separate from the music itself. So it's just like you have a band playing, and the voices, the sounds, the music instruments are completely separate from those pops and cracks. And the surface noise of the vinyl is very much, for me, like if you have a fireplace at home and you see the logs burning, and occasionally there's a crackle or a pop that the fire makes. That's exactly the same sound that a pop or something which is in your grooves. If there's an obstacle, that will make the same kind of sound as a fire burning, and that should be normal. And this will be the case when you go for most silver in your system. However, Robert experienced something quite different. He experienced that the records almost became unlistenable because there was so much noise in there. So when I experience this, then there's something else going on, and in these cases, let's have a look at it, what might be going on. So I found that in that case, there's a problem with the system, because often if you, first of all, if we listen to our records in a system that is more revealing than the one we are used to, of course we will hear more pops and hisses and crackles, but it should not be more disturbing. If it's more disturbing than what we are used to, then it means that system is doing more than revealing additional information, but it's also processing the information that you receive. And unfortunately, I have found that the vast majority of high-end systems, they add additional processing to the material that you listen to, and that's how a lot of additional resolution or apparent resolution is gained, that the system is not resolving to the degree that you think it is, but it seems to be so resolving because it processes the music. And one of the main processing tricks that systems employ is to pop out the high frequencies, so to give a couple extra dB to the high frequencies. And in that case, that will really overemphasize the pops and cracks and hisses on your system, because most of these pops, a lot of the information that's stored in the record that makes them very audible and noticeable is in the high frequency range. And curiously, the number one thing that is responsible for these pops and hisses and crackles being annoying is the stylus. Because when the stylus is reading in the groove, it's tracking your signal. Basically, it's moving up and down, side to side. And whenever it encounters something that causes a pop, which is like a dust particle in here, then what will happen is, in the case of most cartridges, as it bumps that dust piece, it will lose contact with the groove. So it will just bounce around before settling down. And that just happens for a few microseconds. But it's enough to create different material, like a high frequency resonance as the stylus is bouncing, and it will be picked up by your phono stage, by your amplifier, and it will show up as very loud noise. So when the stylus is reading in the groove and encounters that dust particle, if it has a good tracking, then it just does this, goes around the dust particle, and then it continues its tracking job. And then it will not start to bounce around, and without the bouncing, there is no additional high frequency distortion added to it. You will just hear it as like a pop, as like a fire burning, and it's crackling once. If the stylus is not dampened properly, then when it meets that particle, there's that pop in the background, but then as it bounces around, then you get that high frequency annoying quality to it. And that's what drives people mad and crazy. And the second thing that comes after this, so if your stylus does this jumping around, that bounciness, when it encounters dust particles or scratches, then there's a second component, the amplifier's harmonic distortion. Especially solid-state amplifiers and amplifiers that employ a lot of negative feedback. They make this situation much, much worse. So when we have that high frequency noise coming out as a result of lost tracking, then your amplifier will add high order harmonic distortion component to it. And don't believe your brochures that your amplifier has only 0.001% harmonic distortion, because that's a scenario only for very controlled cases, read at 1 kilohertz at like a 1 watt or a specific watt condition. When your stylus gets into this mode that it starts oscillating, then it will give extremely high level of very high frequency content, which is close or runs into the feedback loop's outer edges. And there it will create a massacre, because it will interact with your feedback loop, and instead of having that 0.001% thing, it will totally mess up your high frequency response, and that's why the records will sound unlistenable. So if that happens, that's not the LP's fault, it's a fault of the system, which overemphasizes high frequency information and tries to do processing, extreme processing to the sound, which you do not recognize when there is artificially quiet material fed to it. But when there's something that has like a white noise or pink noise component, or very high frequency information, or a sudden loss of tracking for the stylus, then it's all going to get screwed up very, very badly. So I think these were the conditions that you run into, which made the LPs unlistenable. Because generally it is my experience that the more silver I'm using in the cabling, the more innocuous the noise gets. There is an additional component that the tweeter adds harmonic distortion to the sound, and it's sets of distortions and compression and hitting its limitations when it's required to reproduce something at the limit of its frequency range, at the peak of its power handling capacity. And unfortunately, when you have like that dust particle and the stylus going crazy, amplifier adding its distortion to it, then the tweeter is asked to do something which it should never be doing, and that it cannot do, and it makes the situation, if it was worse, it makes it unbearable. So basically, I think the problem was that you run into a system which was really geared towards generating a lot of additional high frequency detail, which is not on any recording, and that works when we have digital material or LPs which are pristinely clear. But if there is like slightest noise, dust on the record, or tape hiss or anything like that, then these systems will render such recordings unlistenable. But it's not the problem of silver. The silver just makes this problem more apparent. But if they were to use copper cables, the problem would still be there, although to a much lesser degree, because the copper hides a lot of these high frequency instabilities. It doesn't let them pass through. So if you have a system like this and you have trouble with LP noise and you already have silver cables, then if you want to keep your current system, current components, then go for copper cables, and they will hide a lot of this problem, but it will also result in the collapse of the sound for your CDs as well. Plus, there is a fourth component to it, that is power conditioning. The more silver you have in your system, the more reactive it will be to your neighbors polluting the electricity. And in cases when everyone is using their computers, they are running their freezers, maybe running industrial users nearby, it's going to all of those noises and all of those problems are going to come through your power supply and be apparent in the music, because we have to be reminded of the fact that what we are listening to is two components. We are listening to our room acoustics and to the electricity that we get from the wall. These are the ingredients that the sound is generated from. The music that we listen to, the music material, that's the recipe that a stereo system uses. So a stereo system is like a chef that uses the recipe, either a CD or other digital format or a record, and based on this recipe, it uses those two components, electricity and room acoustics, to generate the music you hear. And silver allows you to use these components to a much greater extent than copper would allow. So it will mean that you will be able to hear when your line electricity is pure, then that will impact the sound to an extreme degree. But when you are getting garbage in, then it will be garbage out. And if it happens to meet surface noise on your records, it's going to make that surface noise situation even worse than it was. However, when you have perfect line AC situation, then that noise, which is normally bothersome during those bad line AC conditions, it will be totally even unnoticeable. It will recede to an unnoticeable level. So all of these four components, any of these, or I would say probably a combination of these were the cause why the LP surface noise became such an issue. And these are the areas where we can take steps to improve that aspect. So I hope this was helpful and to understand what's happening. And Robert, I wish you an awesome audio journey, and most likely there's nothing wrong with your records. It's just most of the time, especially showroom systems, they are optimized to play show material, and the showrooms often forget that what real people listen to is real music material, and not that just that optimized show material. Of course, if we want a good show, the greatest show, yes, then we want something that was designed to give the biggest show. But I would say we listen to those kind of recordings maybe once a month. Maybe only I do listen to those only when I'm with my audio buddies, and we just put them on because they are sources of reference, but that's not my staple diet. And when we look for a system for our home, we should be really critical about it. Do we want to play only show songs at home, or do we want access to the music we love? So thank you. Please like, subscribe, and have fun. Bye bye.